BYU football improves to 10-1 this season as the Cougars take down the Cincinnati Bearcats 26-14 here in Cincinnati. And I'm your BYU insider, Mitch Harper, here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, unpacking everything that took place from BYU's big win over the Bearcats. So much to take away from this game. I think the biggest thing that you note from this victory for BYU, they're now 10-1. You never take for granted double-digit win seasons. Think about this. Since 2020, Kalani Sitake has led BYU to 4 double-digit win seasons, and that's pretty remarkable. That puts BYU in a tier with some of the elite programs, some of the brands that get the benefit of the doubt. BYU is consistently winning at a high level, and they showed that on Saturday night. And I will say, too, I think BYU put some style points on the board with BYU style. And what I mean by that is they showed their style of play in this victory over Cincinnati. The physicality of BYU's ground attack won the day as L.J. Martin goes off for a career-high performance, 222 rushing yards, 44 receiving yards. L.J. was fantastic. BYU as a team ran for 265 yards, only passed for 127. Cincinnati passes for 300 and was held to 87 yards on the ground. BYU's physicality overwhelmed Cincinnati. I thought BYU was clearly the better football team in this game, and I thought L.J. Martin was brilliant. And I know at times he was walking a little bit gingerly. He downplayed any sort of notion that he was banged up. And look, everyone's going to get banged up. When you're this late in the season and you've got a game where LJ gets 32 carries, Bear Bachmeier gets 13 carries. Look, Kalani's told us the whole season that he believes he can give a huge workload to LJ Martin. I think back to the Colorado game in Boulder. I think LJ got 22 carries in that game. And Kalani's like, I'm not hesitant to give him more. We can give him a bigger workload. Same with Bear Bachmeier as well. And Bear had that moment in the fourth quarter with about 7.5 minutes to go where he's grimacing on the sideline, and BYU didn't attempt to pass the rest of the way. But it's kind of in BYU's DNA a bit to just run the football out and end a football game. They haven't done that really this season. They did that a couple times last year. It was the first time they did that this year, and they get it done on the ground. And look, that's going to be something to monitor to see how Bear responds. But I think it was noteworthy, too, that BYU was still running him. It's not like, and again, Bear was running around, and look, he looked like he was nursing a little bit of his upper body in that 7-minute mark. But again, everyone's banged up to this point. You got to move forward and get ready for the next game against UCF coming up on Saturday in Provo. But again, it was a memorable performance for L.J. Martin, and it just highlights how good of a player he is. I've said it all along. The season goes as far as L.J. Martin will take it, and L.J. Martin is good enough to simply put the offense on his back. It's unfortunate for BYU that the Cougars really have no other running backs besides him. I mean, he's it. There is no other option. They had Enoch Nawahine in a play. He got 1 carry for 2 yards. There was a direct snap, and then there was a timeout blown. There's no other option at running back. They talk about Preston Rex. They talk about Javesa Demouni. That's going to have to be a position that BYU overhauls in the offseason when portal season opens up in January. To me, that's got to be priority number 1, 2, and 3 to hit it hard at running back and really restock that roster because – honestly, too, after tonight's performance, if you're L.J. Martin, you got to maybe start considering the NFL. And I know that he's getting caught up in the moment of trying to lead this BYU team to a Big 12 title in the college football playoff, but that was an NFL running back that we saw here in Cincinnati with L.J. Martin on display, and now he rushed for over 1,000 yards this season. First BYU running back since 2021 to do that. He's about 20 or so yards away from cracking the top 10 in career rushing yards all time in BYU. L.J. Martin is just a special football player. And I thought also, too, he continues to improve as a receiver as well. Chase Roberts goes down in the first half. L.J. Martin steps up. He's got 3 catches for 44 yards. So BYU comes out of this thing a little bit banged up, but you're near the finish line. You are almost there to Arlington to get to your ultimate goal of winning the Big 12 championship and at least playing in that game and potentially having a rematch against the Cincinnati Bearcats. But I think BYU won with their style, and defensively, I thought BYU's defense was very stout throughout. BYU ends up, again, only allowing 387 yards, but to limit Cincinnati to 87 rushing yards, I thought was significant. Now, I know that over the course of this season, Cincinnati has kind of pivoted to more of a passing attack. They had Evan Pryor back in their backfield this week, but they kind of had the key personnel in that backfield, and they were still not able to run the football on BYU. I thought that was a really promising development for this BYU defense that at times in Big 12 play has given up a lot of yards this year, but BYU was excellent. And I just don't think there was anything that Cincinnati did that completely threw off BYU. There were moments where maybe it looked like Cincinnati was getting momentum, that punt return that kind of popped up and landed into the punt returner's hands, and he took a risky move on a hop to return that, but that thing swung. Manny Covey, I believe, 57-yard return, and then 2 plays later, Sorsby connected with Cyrus Allen for a touchdown, and it was tied up at 7 at that point in the second quarter. You thought, okay, here we go. We got a ball game. But BYU responded, and then the next drive, they go score a field goal with Will Farron, a 31-yarder. BYU always had answers. They always felt like they were in control of this game, and I thought some of the defensive performers that really caught my attention. Tausili Akana, once again, has a really good game. Co-leader in tackles along with Evan Johnson and Sialia Sarah. Each of those guys had 5 tackles. Tanner Wall, third quarter, Johnny on the spot. Terrible throw by Brendan Sorsby. It was probably the easiest interception that Tanner Wall will ever have in his BYU career. But Tanner Wall's now up to 4 interceptions this season. He just makes plays. And what was great about that moment in the third quarter, BYU is up 10-7. They pick off Sorsby. They take over in their own territory. That was the first drive of the third quarter for Cincinnati where, that middle 8 is so critical. We talked about that this week on Cougar Tracks here on the show. And BYU won that middle 8. And they go down the field, put together a touchdown drive that, 11 plays, 66 yards, and L.J. Martin capped it off with a 1-yard touchdown run, and BYU was up 17-7. I kind of felt like right there, with the way that BYU was having success on the ground, I just thought, I don't see Cincinnati winning this football game when BYU was just up 10. And then they get it up to 20-7 at the start of the fourth quarter with another Will Farron field goal. Like, BYU left points on the field, and they still, win comfortably 26-14. There was a little bit late in the game when LJ popped off that 33-yard touchdown run to go over 200 yards. Should he have done that? Should he have just went down? That's up for debate. But again, you want it both ways. You want the style points, and then you don't. Like, look, a double-digit victory, that's a good thing for BYU. You go 2 straight games after the Texas Tech setback where you're taking care of business and you're winning again with BYU style. I think it's a good thing. And, again, we'll see how this team's feeling coming out of this one because it was a physical football game, and it just seems like everyone's kind of crawling to the end. I mean, that's college football in general, too. It's a war of attrition, it seems like, anymore in this college football playoff era. And I'd like to think that BYU might have the personnel that if they needed to do some load management with a guy like Chase Roberts, hey, Chase, just get right for a potential Big 12 championship game. We got this against UCF. Sit out. Let's get you right for Arlington. I'd like to think BYU's got the personnel to do that. Some other things that kind of caught my attention in this game, the first drive of the game, early in the game, there were some third down penalties from BYU that were drive killers. BYU had a holding penalty that was kind of a weird throw, it was a right call, but the official, the back judge, threw the flag, which was kind of interesting in that spot. But there were some third down penalties. Jada had, I believe, a false start. So there were some areas to really clean up. And again, that's where BYU left some points on the field in this game. I thought the defense really showed up early, forcing a 3-and-out. Bodie Schoonover got a tackle for loss right away. Evan Johnson with a nice tackle. They kind of set the tone early in this game. And, 3rd and 10, first drive of the game, Sorsby sells it a little bit. And it was just right there that this team with a 2-game losing streak was a little bit off base once again. And now Cincinnati goes on a 3-game skid. Once 7-1 this year, they're now 7-4 and potentially staring down 7-5 as they've got to go on the road at TCU next week, which is no easy task as TCU took down Houston in Houston this weekend. And again, reminder, BYU hammered that TCU team 44-13 last week in Provo, which for whatever reason just got completely forgotten, but it was a dominant performance by BYU. Bear Bachmeier, I think, passing the football, it was nothing spectacular. There were moments where Bear, I think, had freshman moments where some of his deep passes were not the greatest, I thought. Felt a little predetermined in stretches for Bear. 15-25, 127 passing yards, 60% completion rate. And again, they didn't really turn to the air at all in the fourth quarter. After, midway through the fourth, it was all running the football with Bear and LJ Martin to finish that game out and close it down with that 26-14 win. Some receiving numbers. Parker Kingston had 7 catches for 39 yards. Carson Ryan, 2 catches, 16 yards. Again, the passing game wasn't much to write home about in this game. And I think, what kind of stood out to me, too, in this contest was BYU is the ultimate complementary football team. We've known that for some time now. But I think that showed itself once again here at Nippert Stadium. Tough environment, and I know there were some choice chants that were posted out there in social media, and I'm sure we'll hear a statement of some kind that's sent out, and you can add it to the long list that's been going on, seems like, for the last 4 years when it comes to BYU sporting events. But it was an energetic crowd. I thought Nippert Stadium was an excellent venue. I thought it was really cool. I love the whole, students can walk through the stadium. I like Nippert Stadium a lot. I think it's a really cool setting for a college football game. I like the building in the end zone, the flagpole. I just think the aesthetic, the vibes, the look, it's a really cool looking stadium. And I don't know if they can really ever expand that at all because it's a landlocked stadium, but I thought it was really cool. And the press box was pretty solid. I have no complaints about Nippert Stadium, but, the crowd was energized. And despite a team that was on a 2-game skid, Cincinnati fans showed up. BYU fans definitely showed up. But, BYU ultimately was the better team throughout this evening. And it didn't help the cause for Cincinnati that they had their excellent kicker missing field goals left and right, and that was just drive killers for Cincinnati. BYU early in the game had a turnover on downs that they forced against Cincinnati, but then they had 3 drives end basically from the same hash mark too. 3 missed field goals from their excellent kicker in Rusnak. He had 2 misses in the second quarter, 42, 40, and then he had a miss in the third quarter. That one was probably more of the holder. I was writing down my notes, 5:13 to go in the third, 48 was the distance, but 0 of 3 for a guy that was 12 of 13 coming into the game, one of the best kickers in the Big 12, 92% conversion rate, on those field goal attempts, and had only missed 1 field goal dating back to last year, and he misses 3 on senior night. Pretty crazy stuff, because if you get those 9 points, it's 26-23. Maybe Cincinnati's playing with a lead in the fourth quarter, and BYU needs to put together a touchdown drive to go win it instead of the style points touchdown drive that it ended up being in the fourth quarter. That's a completely different feel to that game and that stadium if he's making those field goals. So that was huge in this contest. I thought was also interesting was how creative, well, I don't want to say creative, because we've seen this quite often with Kalani Sitake teams, how opportunistic they are when they see the substitutions. Cincinnati was trying to go up-tempo. I think it was at the end of the second quarter. they have a substitution. Cincinnati, for whatever reason, clock's still running. BYU, they took full advantage of that. They bring out their substitutions, forces Cincinnati to call a timeout. It's little things like that where, again, BYU, if you want to say, they're not a good football team, they're not a playoff team, but it's a really good, sound football team that when they see opportunities to take advantage in little things like that, they pounce. And I just think those are the little things about this BYU team that they're really sound and pretty good. I still think you could be better from this performance. You got a solid victory over a 7-win football team in a power conference by double figures, and you like that, but they could have been better. That's for sure for this BYU team, and they have to get better. If they want to have that rematch against Texas Tech, which all indications would point that's going to happen, BYU has to get a lot better to close that gap between the Red Raiders and the Cougars. But I'd also like to think, too, that a potential rematch, BYU with a much healthier LJ Martin than what he was in Lubbock, gives BYU a chance. Because if they can run the football like they did tonight against that elite defense in Texas Tech, man, that would be quite a sight to see. Some special teams lapses. I brought up the BYU punt return where they gave up that 57-yarder and the field goals for Cincinnati. They had those misses that were very costly, but they also had an offsides. BYU looks like they're going to go 3-and-out punt, and then Cincinnati, I think it was player number 19, number 18, he was offsides, and BYU stays on the field. That was huge, I thought, for BYU to be able to stay on the field and just costly mistakes that Cincinnati made. And I think that's one of the things with Cincinnati when you look big picture at that program. You know, Scott Satterfield, when games are on the line, can he get it done? I don't know. Like, I think that they've made progress as a program this year. I wouldn't fire him, especially with how crazy this coaching carousel is with all the moving pieces that are out there. But still, is this kind of the ceiling? Has Satterfield hit that? I don't know. Because when games are on the line, I don't know if I trust Cincinnati to get it done. They've had a lot of close calls this year, and Nebraska in week 1, this one, and they make some head-scratching mistakes at times in these games. But you got to also credit BYU as well for this. BYU, too, the absence of Chase Roberts, going back to that, you know, Kalani kind of hinted that he thinks that Chase could be back. Is that a case of Kalani being overly optimistic? Maybe, but at the same time, Kalani in initial post games this year, you go back to Jack Kelly when he suffered an injury against West Virginia. He said in that moment in the post game, right after the game, yeah, Jack's probably better than we initially thought coming out. And Jack played, 2 weeks later against Utah and was darn near close to playing against Arizona. So it's not like Kalani's always just overly optimistic about these injuries and leading us astray. So the initial intel would suggest, according to Kalani, that Chase would be back. So we'll see on that. But again, I think with Chase, if you can, and I think you should be able to, do some load management, say, Chase, get ready for Arlington, and assume, BYU's got to get it done against UCF. And UCF had a close call against Oklahoma State, which didn't shock me. If you listen to the show this week, I predicted Oklahoma State to beat UCF. The Knights, of course, ended up winning 17-14, but I knew that would be a close game. UCF now 5-6, fighting for their postseason lives to get to 6-6 and extend their season if they could take down BYU in the regular season finale. And, of course, BYU looking to punch their ticket to the Big 12 championship game next week. And another thing that caught my attention in the third quarter, and I wished it would have happened, on that drive, the first offensive series of the third quarter, LJ Martin gets the rushing TD, but the play before that, the beef play, Bear Bachmeier throws a pass attempt to Trevin Ostler nearly for a touchdown. That would have been sweet to see the beef play get a touchdown grab with Trevin Ostler, who was someone that I thought could be a pretty good offensive lineman. Look, he's still built like an lineman, but they've got him lined up at tight end now, and he adds to the beef when they line up in that formation. You see Kyle Safarachok lining up in the backfield. It is as beefy as the name would suggest when they line up in that formation. Anisi Purcell on the defensive side, he was playing with a club. I thought he did a nice job in the game for BYU. Anisi's dealt with his share of injuries really over the last month and a half of the season, but has done a really nice job for the Cougars. Keanu Tanavasa, I thought he did an excellent job once again for BYU, and he's looking every bit the dominant defensive tackle that he was expected to be when he signed with BYU out of the portal from Utah. And when I asked him about how this team has bounced back from that loss to Texas Tech, and he kind of pointed to everyone thinks they're lucky. I think he said something to the effect of they're resilient. But, Keanu Tanavasa is a motivational speaker. He's excellent in that front, but he's a really good football player as well. I think he's gotten better, too, in the back half of the season for the Cougars. Looking at some of my other notes here from this game here for BYU. Yeah, it was So Cincinnati had that drive where they miss a field goal in the third quarter. It was their second offensive series. And then BYU's next offensive series, they go 3-and-out, and it's a punt. And Maury Bamba was the gunner on that punt, but ended up being an offsides on Cincinnati. Such a huge swing there. And look, that drive ended up with points. BYU got 3 extra points in that because of that offsides, and BYU was able to also kill clock. It was a 6-minute time of possession drive for BYU, so that was a huge luxury for the Cougars. And then the next drive, Tavion Beasley comes up with a tackle, and he was getting a lot of praise on the TV broadcast for that. It looked like a fumble. Isaiah Glasker was there, and after review, they ruled it a fumble, and it was the right call. That was absolutely a fumble, and BYU took over. Glasker would have been, was there for a scoop and score, but they blew it dead, and it was the spot there. But a huge moment there for Tavion Beasley, who has quietly done a nice job, I think, for the Cougars. Most of his contributions haven't really gone recognized, I think, this season, the transfer from San Diego State. But a good moment for Tavion Beasley to just, again, build some confidence heading down this stretch run, because you need everyone. If you're going to have a Big 12 championship and add a trophy to the trophy room and get your first conference championship since 2007, you need everyone contributing at a high level. And I think little underrated performances like that help the cause for BYU. Saw Waylon Lapuaho at the game here on Saturday. He was sporting a boot on his left foot. Kind of thought to be an ankle situation there for Waylon Lapuaho, who got injured last week in the game against TCU in BYU's 44-13 victory over the Horned Frogs last week. We saw that brief moment where Enoch Nawahine had a direct snap, and then BYU ended up calling a timeout, and then after that they ended up punting to Cincinnati. And that following drive, so about 8:27 to go in the fourth quarter, Cincinnati, I love some of the work that we got to see from Nusi Taumoi-Peau, and I was watching him in pregame, and it just kind of dawned on me when he doesn't have the pads on how big he has gotten since fall camp and how much growth he has experienced from late July to now in late November. That's about 3.5, 4 months. Nusi is a completely different guy. I think he is just going to be off the charts good for BYU. He has got such a big future. But just seeing him at field level, getting the chance to go down on the field and kind of observe him and see in pregame warmups how he's operating, and just kind of seeing the team go through those pregame workouts, Nusi is going to be big time. It was almost like startling to see how big he is. And now you see the impact on the field, and he's only a true freshman. This guy's going to be really good. He had a big hit on Sorsby, and Sorsby actually completed that pass. It was a deep ball I think it was to Allen that got down to the BYU 18, it was to Covey, and Covey was getting defended by Jack Kelly, I believe. down to the BYU 18, and then Cincinnati made a game of it. It was 20-14 with about 4:37 to go. They had that quick touchdown strike to Caldwell, and Caldwell, I thought, was going to be one of the best receivers in the Big 12 this year. They don't target him that much, Cincinnati. I was kind of surprised by that. Caldwell only ends up with 2 catches, 20 yards, and one of which was the 19-yard grab for a touchdown that I just noted that made it 20-14, and then BYU takes it over. 4:30 to go, and they put the hammer down and run that football with L.J. Martin and Bear Bachmeier, and Cougs get out of there with a 26-14 win, and they improved to 10-1 overall, 7-1 in Big 12 play, and I think we're looking at a team that's going to be 11-1 next week. I'd be very stunned to see UCF knock off BYU. I was looking at ESPN.com, and they've got the game listed as an 11 a.m. kickoff on ESPN2, which would make sense considering the Big 12 championship game is an early kick. It would be a disservice to a team to have to play a late-night Big 12 after dark spot and then have a shorter turnaround to get ready for that game in Arlington. So according to ESPN.com, we'll see. No official word yet from the Big 12 Conference, but ESPN.com says an 11 a.m. kickoff between BYU and UCF next Saturday on ESPN2. Again, that's nothing official from the Big 12 Conference, but it's from ESPN.com, so we'll see if that is, in fact, official for BYU and UCF. But it was a huge night here in Cincinnati. I had a blast covering this game and covering this team here at Nippert Stadium. I thought the entry to the stadium, they go down a tunnel. There's a police escort. I thought it was a really cool setting for a college football game, and I can see the history, the mystique of the venue. I think it's really cool. And unfortunate those chants from the students, especially when you consider how much charity BYU and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints provided to the community of Cincinnati this week. Going to the BYU alumni tailgate for a little bit before the game, and there's also a coat drive taking place to gather coats for those in need in the Cincinnati area. BYU fans, not to say they're perfect or they're the definition of what should be charity and giving back, but it does blow me away how BYU goes into these communities for these football games and they use it as an opportunity to give back. And it's pretty cool. And I'd like to think too, it's almost like a little bit of the good karma. You're putting out this good karma to all these different areas and markets. And because this wasn't always a thing. BYU has played many road games over the years, and they haven't always done this. But since the Big 12 came into the picture for BYU, this has become common practice where they go into these markets and they give back. And it's no surprise that suddenly BYU is just winning a lot of football games. And look, again, you got to execute. It's about players, about coaching. But I think it's also like a case of a little bit of good karma. I think BYU's on a impressive run right now. And I think, too, when it comes to BYU in the Big 12, we talk so much about how the Big 12 is so wide open and so unpredictable. At what point do we acknowledge, I think Cougar fans acknowledge this, but at what point does the college football landscape and the college football national media acknowledge BYU is a steady force in the Big 12? In a league that is so unpredictable, BYU is the one thing that is predictable. 21-3 since 2024. The Cougars just show up and they win football games. There's nothing glitzy or glamorous about it. They just win football games. And that's becoming almost as predictable as anything else. Yes, the one game in Texas Tech at Lubbock was not great. It did not show well. And they didn't have that complimentary football that shined in this game and shined against TCU. But BYU is a consistent football team. And that wasn't always the case when Kalani Sitake took over. There'd be the moments where you'd go beat a Wisconsin, but then you'd have some lows against a Northern Illinois. I've seen the extremes of Kalani Sitake teams over the years. he's turned the corner running this program where they are a model of consistency. And at some point, the national media in college football, the College Football Playoff Committee have to start acknowledging that, because this program is consistently a winner. And they're in a power conference that's highly resourced programs with great facilities. I mean, I'm walking around Cincinnati. They got a $135 million indoor practice facility. It's way nicer than the IPF. I mean, I go around these Big 12 places, and I honestly get floored that BYU does what they do. When you look at BYU's facilities compared to these Big 12 places, Cincinnati has better facilities than BYU on the day-to-day operational side. Not saying game day. I think LES is better. Bigger, more fans can get in there. You got more opportunities for corporate stuff and all that sort of thing, make more money. But as far as the day in, day out for the player, the facilities here at Cincinnati are way better. And that's a common theme in the Big 12. Yet BYU is the winningest team in the Big 12 since last year. And no one nationally gives them credit, and they just point to them as, lucky. They defy the Vegas odds, yet they keep piling up the victories. Will it lead to BYU having a chance to get an at-large bid in the playoff? I'm not optimistic. I'm not. I just think that BYU has to win the Big 12 championship game to get in, which is total shame, because I think if you go 11-1 in a power league, you should absolutely be in. And I talked about that about a week and a half ago. But with the way it's been set up and no one really in front of BYU is losing, it's hard to picture a path to where if they don't win the Big 12 championship game, they get in. We'll see. Maybe the committee will say, you know what, we respected they got the 13th data point. Let's put them in. But if it comes down to BYU and Notre Dame, BYU and Alabama, I'm not optimistic about BYU's chances. I'm just not. But the great thing is, go win the game. Go win against UCF. Go win against Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship game. And then you're going to the playoff. And that's all you can ask for as a Cougar fan, because that is what BYU fans have been dreaming of forever, is direct access to the biggest stages of the sport and to control their own destiny. Well, they've got it in front of them, and it all continues next week against UCF. We'll have full coverage of that game next week in Provo. I'll be working my way back from Orlando, which would be crazy because I'm going to Florida after this for BYU basketball in an MTE in Thanksgiving. So it's going to be a hectic week. I'll be in Florida throughout the week, have a ton of BYU football content, though, so you'll see me in different backdrops in Florida. I'll be seeing some family for the Thanksgiving holiday, so it should be a lot of fun covering BYU hoops and getting ready for Cougar football against UCF next week to close out the regular season. Can you believe it? We're already reached the end of the BYU football regular season. It's hard to believe, but we're at that point. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. It's post-game wrap-up here from Cincinnati. Cougs get it done, 26-14. I'll talk to you next time here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.